Well, boys and girls, we finally made it to our last reading of our book 11 by Tom Rogers. I hope you've really been enjoying it with me. I'm ready for today. I'm going to try my best not to cry, but I can't promise you that won't happen. Okay, let's go ahead and get started on our final chapters. We're going to read 3 of them today, okay? Let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 38 is called Night. It's now 8:31 p.m. It looks like Mac will be who we're dealing with right now in this chapter. All right, let's get started. Mac stood at the kitchen counter waiting for the coffee to brew. It was his 4th pot of the day. The doctor had told him to lay off the caffeine, but he figured they'd make an exception for today. He breathed in the steam, thinking back to the first pot of the morning. He pictured Bobby coming into the kitchen with his crisp white shirt, sleeves unbuttoned, jacket slung over his arm. They drank their coffee in comfortable silence, the way they always did. Mac with the sports section, Bobby reading business. Then Bobby checked his watch, stood up, and shrugged on his coat. "See you tonight, Pop." And then he was gone. The coffee maker beeped. Mac opened his eyes and poured himself a cup. From behind the counter, he had a perfect view out the window to the corner at the end of the street. Before dementia clouded her mind, Dottie used to sit at the counter and watch for Bobby to come around that corner on his way home from work. Mac used to tease her about it. But the truth is, he'd do the same thing, finding excuses to be in the kitchen so he could sneak a peek over her shoulder as he came and went. Mac stared out the window for the 100th time that day, then closed his eyes and tried to conjure up the scene. Bobby coming around the corner, stepping into the yellow glow of the street lamp, the light on his white shirt like a ray of sunshine. Mac kept his eyes closed, trying to hold onto the image, trying to make it come true. He realized he was making deals again. He didn't care. "Where's Robert?" Mac spun around so fast he spilled his coffee. Dottie was standing in her nightgown in the middle of the living room, gazing around with a troubled, quizzical expression. The house had been so quiet he'd almost forgotten she was back there. "Hey there, kiddo, what are you up to? Or what are you doing up?" he asked quietly. Dottie turned and looked at him. Mac couldn't tell if she still recognized him or not, but she allowed him to lead her back down the hall to the bedroom. He pulled back the covers and helped her swing her legs up and into bed. She still seemed agitated, so he sat with her and stroked her hand, which always calmed her. But not tonight. "Where's Robert?" she asked again. Mac swallowed hard and looked out the window. "He's on his way home." Let's look back at this word agitated right here and use our context clues to figure out what this word means. It says he pulled back the covers and helped her swing her legs into the bed. She still seemed agitated, so he sat with her and stroked her hand, which always calmed her. So because this word says agitated, and then it said so he sat with her and stroked her hand, which calmed her, we can infer that agitated means that it makes you upset or maybe angry and you get frustrated. And to calm her down, he stroked her hand. So that would be the opposite. Calm would be the opposite of agitated. So that's how you can figure out that word agitated, by using your context clues. All right, let's go to our next chapter, chapter 39, Vigil. The time is 8:31 p.m. Now let's look back at the last chapter. That too is 8:31 p.m. So is this one going to be about the man in the white shirt's point of view? Or do you think it might be about Alex and Nunu? Let's find out. Vigil, chapter 39, 8:31 p.m. The man in the white shirt was the last one off the bus. As he stepped down to the street, he turned back to the driver and nodded. "Have a safe night," he said. Yeah," the driver mumbled. "You too," he added, a little more brightly. The driver waited for him to cross in front of the bus before pulling slowly away from the curb and heading off in the other direction. Before long, the bus rounded a curve and vanished from sight. The man in the white shirt was surprised by how quiet it was, so close to the center of town. The streets were empty. The restaurant's closed. And then he realized why. Everyone had gone home. As he turned down a lane full of small, tidy houses, he could see lights on in every window and people sitting in those windows, looking up and down the street. Neighbors huddled in small groups on the sidewalk. Old men sat on their porches. He felt their eyes searching him as he passed, trying to place him to see if they knew him. Everywhere he looked, people were watching, waiting, sitting vigil. Max sat on his porch stoop, nursing a mug of coffee that had long ago been gone cold. Beside him sat the model plane he'd been flying that afternoon. He idly spun the propeller as he glanced up the street corner. Still nobody there. Then he heard footsteps coming from the other direction. He leaned forward. The street was darker at that end, and he squinted into the shadows. He could just make out the silhouette of a person coming closer. But as they passed in front of his house, he saw it was a woman, the lawyer who lived 4 doors down. She waved, and he waved and forced a smile, trying to hide his disappointment. Then he settled back on his elbows, again to wait. Alex pushed the curtains back and peered out the front window again. Still nobody. Behind him, Radar whimpered. Alex watched him circle the big lounger again, sniffing at it furiously and whining in frustration. He'd been calm after dinner, and now he was agitated again, pacing and whining constantly. I told you that's Dad's chair. Alex started toward the living room, ready to defend the chair again, but Radar pushed past him and hurried to the front door. He pawed the door and scratched at the frame, still whimpering like mad. Oh, you gotta go, boy? And suddenly it made sense. Radar whimpered again. Alex unlocked the door and swung it open for Radar to go do his business. The second the door opened, Radar bolted. No! Alex took off after Radar, but the dog shot away like a rocket. He bounded across the yard at top speed, jumped the neighbor's hedge, then hit the ground and kept on going. Alex chased him to the corner, but Radar was already long gone, blocks away and out of sight. Just like that. Radar! Radar! No way, thought Alex. What happened? It can't be over. I can't lose him just like that. He looked back at the house, where he could see the light from inside spilling out the front door. He couldn't just let Radar go, but he couldn't leave his sister alone. Radar! Alex stood on the corner, listening for a bark, a whine, anything. He listened until his shouts died off into echoes. And then there was nothing. Silence. Radar was gone, vanished into the darkness. The man in the white shirt detoured into the big city park. He figured a shortcut would save him nearly a half hour. What he hadn't counted on was that it would be so dark. Usually there were ball games out here under the lights, but tonight the fields were empty, the lights out. He didn't want to admit it, but halfway through the park he got a little spooked. He was crossing the baseball field at the edge of the woods when he heard something moving through the brush. He froze, listening. 10 yards away, he saw a figure emerge from the woods. A dog. No collar. Probably a stray. The man in the white shirt didn't move a muscle. The dog saw him anyway. It paused, staring back. It was big and had some kind of bandage on its ear. It cocked its head, watching him, and then loped away. The man in the white shirt breathed a sigh of relief, chuckling at his own jumpy nerves, and continued on his way. Alex felt numb. He still couldn't believe that Radar was gone. So he tried not to think about it and got busy cleaning the kitchen. He wiped down the table and vacuumed under Nunu's chair. He dried the dishes and put them away in the cabinet. He scooped the leftovers into a plastic bin and opened the refrigerator to stow them inside, and came to a complete halt. There, on the bottom shelf, sat his birthday cake, the one his mom had made for him tonight. Towered to A-Dog, it read in green icing, "Happy Birthday." Alex had been told a zillion times not to stand there with the refrigerator door open, but he couldn't help it. He stared at the cake as an idea slowly took shape in his mind. When he was sure what he wanted to do, he slammed the door and headed off with purpose. He was a man with a plan. He hurried to the pantry and found the bag of birthday decorations his mom had bought. He grabbed some scissors and tape, dumped the decorations on the kitchen table, and got to work. 20 minutes later, the job was done. The banner was complete. He carried the banner into the living room and stood on a kitchen chair to pin it to the drapes. When it was hanging straight, he stepped back to examine the finished product. Behind him, a key slid in the front door. Alex spun around. The door swung open, and there stood his mom. She took 2 steps into the room, then stopped short, taking in Alex and the banner and the TV news in the background, and she knew he knew everything. "Oh, Alex," she said as she pulled him into her arms and started to cry. The man in the white shirt kept up a steady pace now as he crossed the tall bridge that stretched over a railroad yard and a narrow river. He paused briefly in the center of the highest point, where he could see all the way to Manhattan, glittering like a jewel right down to its southern tip, which remained dark and empty. And then he lowered his head and pushed on. Mac paced the living room, clutching the remote tightly in his fist. The walls flickered from black to blue to black to blue as he ticked through the TV channels, one after another after another. But the story was always the same. Alex's mom sat on the sofa, the light from the muted TV flickering on her face. She was still in her nurse's uniform. She hadn't even bothered to change. After checking on Nunu, who was still asleep, she had collapsed on the couch with her arm around Alex. They hadn't said much since she'd been home. They just held on to each other. "Mom?" She thought he'd fallen asleep. "Yes?" "Why didn't you tell me?" She paused a long time before answering, and then she told him the truth. I didn't think you could handle it." She looked around her at the dishes drying in the kitchen, the banner hanging on the curtain, the door to the bedroom where Nunu was sleeping, safe and sound. "I guess I was wrong." The man in the white shirt was close now. A car zoomed past him and stopped hard in front of a house up the block. A man in his 50s jumped out of the car with the speed of a guy half his age and ran to the front porch, taking the steps 2 at a time as someone inside flung open the front door, bathing him in golden light. The man in the white shirt smiled to himself, knowing he would be there soon. Mac picked up the phone and dialed again. Someone once told him the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. But Mac knew he'd go crazy if he didn't keep trying. So he dialed again, but he put the phone to his ear, waiting to hear his son's voice. The man in the white shirt saw the street light sign lit up by the street lamp on the corner, and his heart jumped into his throat. He turned the corner and picked up the pace. Then he broke into a run. Alex and his mom slumped on the sofa, leaning into each other like 2 poles of a teepee, holding each other up, both asleep. The man in the white shirt sprinted across the lawn and up onto the porch. He tried the door, but it was locked. He searched his pockets. He'd lost his keys. The man in the white shirt laughed to himself. All this way, and he was locked out of his own house. He lifted his arm and knocked sharply on the door. Max stood up and crossed to the front door. He pulled the door open, and then he peered out into the empty night. He took a step onto the porch and looked up toward the corner again, but there was nobody there. And that's the end of chapter 39. So we know that the man in the white shirt knocked on a door at his own house, and Mac opened up the front door and nobody was there. So we can infer now who the man in the white shirt is. If you've been listening carefully to this whole story, you know that Mac's son, Bobby, wasn't the man in the white shirt. So we can infer that something might have happened to Bobby. Okay, let's go on to chapter 40, home, 9:27 p.m. Alex flung open the front door. The man in the white shirt broke into a wide grin and threw open his arms. Alex slept onto his father's chest. He wrapped his legs around his dad's back and buried his face in his neck and hung on like he'd never let go. Alex's mom came running onto the porch right behind him and threw her arms around both of her guys, squeezed between them. Alex felt warm and safe for the first time all day. Together they rocked back and forth in silence. They could have stayed that way all night. Alex wouldn't have minded. Finally, his dad cleared his throat and whispered huskily into Alex's neck. "Hey, pal." "Hi, Dad." Alex closed his eyes as his dad planted a long kiss on the top of his head. "Got one of those for me?" asked his mom. "I've got 1,000, said his dad, covering her face in kisses. They stumbled inside, carrying each other along, and then Alex's dad came to a complete stop, staring at the banner Alex made strung across the living room wall. It read, "Welcome home, Dad." "He did it himself," his mom said. Alex saw his dad swallow hard, unable to speak. "And he cooked dinner, and he did the dishes, and took out the trash," she went on. "I'm proud of you, young man." Young man. Alex liked how that sounded. "He even put Nunu to bed," she added. "Daddy! Come here, you little monkey," he shouted as Nunu hopped down the stairs in her pajamas and ran into his arms. "You're dirty, Daddy," said Nunu as he scooped her up. "You're right, and I'm going to get it all over you." Nunu giggled and twisted as her daddy rubbed his head on her tummy. Only then did Alex notice that Nunu was right. Their dad was covered in soot and grime. His face was streaked with dirt. There were pieces of gravel buried in his hair, and his white shirt and black pants looked like they decided to meet in the middle at gray. "Dad, are you okay?" asked Alex. "I'm fine. We got out in time." Alex nodded. He should have felt relieved, should have felt elation, but something was still bothering him. "Dad?" "Yeah, pal." Alex forced himself to look his father in the eye. "I'm sorry about what I said last night." He lowered his gaze and stared at his sneakers. "I didn't mean it." "I know, Alex. I always knew." Alex looked up. "How?" "It's a dad's job to know." His dad's smile was warmer than an August sun. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, pal." Both of them sniffled as their tears rolled down their cheeks, neither one the least bit embarrassed. Alex's dad stood at the kitchen counter wolfing down Alex's hot dogs and macaroni and cheese like a starving man, which he was. He hadn't eaten a single thing since breakfast. Alex, this is amazing. You could teach your mom a thing or two." She smacked him on the butt with a dish towel. "So how'd you get home?" asked Alex. "Walked a lot," said his dad, following their mom as she brought his food to the table and made him sit down. After shoveling down another mouthful, he continued, "I even cut through the park to get home faster." "Honey, you know that park's not safe at night." "Oh, don't worry. There was nobody there," he reassured her. "Just a dog." Alex sat up straight. "A dog?" The words had barely left his mouth when outside the front door, a dog barked. Alex thought that he was imagining things. By the second bark, he knew this was real. Out on the front porch, something was barking and whining and thumping like a drum against the front door. Alex came out of his chair like a shot. For the second time that night, he ran to the door and flung it open, and was instantly flattened by Radar, who pounced on his chest and started licking his face from top to bottom. "Radar!" Nunu ran up and gave him a big hug. Her arms barely reached around his neck. "Down, boy!" Alex laughed, pushing the dog off. As Alex stood up, his father came slowly to his side, his mouth hanging wide open. "Holy cow, that's the same dog," said his dad. "He had a bandage on his ear, just like that. He must have followed me home from the park." Alex knew better. He was sure Radar had found his dad and made sure he got home safely. "I bet he was watching out for you." Alex's mom put her hands on her hips. "Would someone please explain to me what's going on?" Alex handled the introductions. Mom, Dad, meet Radar. It's his birthday dog, Nunu chimed in. Noons? Alex now found both his parents staring at him in interest. Okay, the thing is, I found him on the way home, and then I tried to give him back, but then he ran away. It's a long story. You brought home a stray dog? Repeated his mom. I wanted to keep him, but he belonged to someone else. The vet told me where he lived, so I tried to take him home. But his house was burned, Nunu explained. The vet? Asked the dad. What vet? Radar was trying to protect us and chased away these bullies who wanted to beat me up, but then they threw a bottle at him and hit him on the head. Wrapped up in his tail, Alex didn't seem to notice his parents' befuddled, slightly horrified expressions as they tried to follow along. So, I took him to the vet. That's where he got the bandage. But he kind of scraped it off when he scrunched under the fence in front of the druggie's house that burned down. Alex's dad's mouth opened and shut like he wanted to ask something, but couldn't figure out which one of his 38 questions to start with. Meanwhile, Alex's mom nursing instinct kicked in. She bent down to check on Radar's bandage. Are you okay, big guy? You took care of my babies? She laughed as Radar licked her hand with his meaty tongue. She scratched his neck, and Radar's tail whacked away at the wall like a jackhammer. And that just made her laugh even harder. And then Alex knew everything was going to be all right. Across town, Matt came in and closed the front door behind him. He'd been sitting on the porch watching the street until he finally grown too chilly. As he passed through the kitchen, he glanced out the window at the empty street corner once more, then put another pot of coffee on and settled back in to wait. He would wait all night and all the next day. But Mac's son would never come home. The next morning, Alex's mom made his favorite birthday breakfast for the second day in a row. The trains to Lower Manhattan were still shut down, so his dad had the day off. As the four of them tucked into their pancakes, Radar sat at Alex's feet, staring at him intently. Finally, Alex grinned and plucked a pancake off the stack. Radar, fetch! He shouted and flung the pancake across the room like a frisbee. Alex, his mother laughed as Radar bounded across the room in 2 steps, caught the pancake in midair, and wolfed it down in a single gulp. He likes your cooking, honey, said their dad. She threw him a fake, angry look, but still enjoyed the compliment. She turned to Alex. So, is there something you'd like to do special for your birthday +1? Alex thought about it a long time. He thought about airplanes and video games, pizza and baseball, cupcakes and the Yankees. Yeah, he answered. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. Alex's dad found a parking spot in front of the burned-out lot at 417 Van Orton Street. As they all got out of the car, Mac appeared on his front porch, looking tired and suspicious. But it was just like before. As soon as he saw Alex and Nunu and Radar, his face opened up and a kind old man smiled out. Alex led the way through the front gate, carrying the plastic food containers under his arm. Mac bent down and gave him a big hug, then stood back up as Alex introduced his parents. Alex's dad put both hands around Mac's when he shook his hand. Thank you for taking care of them, his dad said quietly. It was my pleasure, Mac said. Mac led the way inside. Nunu introduced them to Dottie and flopped down on the sofa beside her to watch cartoons. I'll go put on a pot of coffee, said Mac. Alex stepped forward. I'll help, he said. His parents hung back. They knew he wanted a moment alone with Mac. Alex led Mac into the kitchen. I wanted to give this to you first, he said, and opened the food container. Inside was a big piece of his birthday cake. The green icing on top read, Dog. D-A-W-G. I saved you a piece, said Alex. Mac nodded and got very quiet. What say we share, he said, opening a drawer and taking out 2 forks. Alex put up his hand. Wait. He pulled 2 birthday candles out of his pocket and stood them up on the cake side by side. Then he found the matches his dad had loaned him, struck one carefully, and held it to the first bare wick. Better to light a candle, Alex said. Mac looked at Alex in surprised recognition, then broke into a wide, gentle smile, his eyes dancing in the warm glow of the flickering flames. And that is the end of the story of 11. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Now that you've finished listening to it, you're welcome to take the AR test based on what you've heard. Again, I hope you enjoyed the story, and we will begin a new novel soon. Thank you. Have a good night. Bye-bye.